Hey guys, tonight we are going back to a place that lives deep in our collective memory. A landscape of perfect peace, untouched by time or sorrow. Or rather, what we think is the beginning of that memory. So dim the lights. Maybe let the room go quiet enough to hear your own breathing. Let's drift into the desert together, into the quiet hum of ancient rivers. Drop a comment telling me where you are in the dark right now. I like to picture these stories stretching across time zones while you drift towards sleep. Imagine a garden, not just any garden, but the garden. The very first one. You can almost feel the coolness of the air, scented with unfamiliar blossoms and the damp earth after a gentle rain. The light filtering through dense canopies is soft, dappled, painting shifting patterns on the lush, vibrant green beneath your feet. It's a place of absolute serenity, a sanctuary where time itself seems to slow, almost to a standstill. Close your eyes for a moment and picture this, a landscape of gentle hills and valleys where every tree bears fruit, every flower exhales fragrance, and no thorn pricks the skin. The air is perpetually warm, yet never oppressive, a perfect balance that invites deep, effortless breaths. There is no sound of discord, no harsh cries, only the harmonious symphony of nature. Perhaps the rustle of leaves, the soft chirping of unseen birds, or the distant, soothing hum of something even more ancient. And at the heart of this perfect world, a source. A single spring, pure and clear, bubbling up from the very core of existence. From this spring, a river flows, dividing and branching into 4 mighty streams. You can hear them now, can't you? The soft, rhythmic rush of water, a constant, comforting presence. There's the Pishin perhaps carrying the glint of gold, though no one here cares for such things. The Gihan winding through unfamiliar lands, its waters cool and vital. And then, the two you might know better, the Tigris and the Euphrates. Their currents, wide and slow, are the lifeblood of this paradise, weaving through the landscape like silver threads through an emerald tapestry. Listen closely. Can you distinguish the separate sounds? The gentle lapping of the Pishin against its banks, the deeper, more resonant flow of the Gihan, and the steady, powerful currents of the Tigris and Euphrates, converging, mingling, then separating again in an eternal dance. It's the sound of creation, of abundance, of life itself. It's the sound of humanity's earliest dreams, a collective memory of a golden age, a time before struggle, before hunger, before pain. A place where every need was met, every desire anticipated, and peace was the only law. Let the gentle murmur of these 4 rivers wash over you, carrying you deeper into this ancient dream. It is, perhaps, the most tranquil place our shared history has ever conceived. This garden, this place of 4 rivers, is more than just a story. It's a blueprint for paradise, etched into the foundational texts of countless cultures. For centuries, it was understood as the beginning, the divine origin point of humanity and its story. A place of pure innocence where the first man and woman walked with their Creator. But what if this story, so familiar, so fundamental, wasn't the beginning? What if it was an echo, a whisper carried across millennia, a memory passed down, not created? Picture yourself in a museum archive late at night. The air is cool, dry, smelling faintly of old paper and dust, and the hushed silence is broken only by the distant hum of ventilation. You pull on a pair of white cotton gloves, the kind conservators wear, and approach a long, low table. On it, carefully laid out are fragments, not of paper, not of parchment, but of clay. Tens of thousands of them, each no bigger than the palm of your hand, some even smaller broken shards of what were once entire tablets. They are dull brown, sun-baked and covered in intricate wedge-shaped marks cuneiform. This is the British Museum in the late 19th century. A young, brilliant Assyriologist named George Smith is hunched over these fragments, his lamp casting long shadows across the room. He is painstakingly piecing them together, like a jigsaw puzzle made of time itself. Each fragment is a whisper from a civilization long vanished, a people whose very name was once forgotten. The Sumerians. And then he finds it, a specific fragment, a piece that slots perfectly into another and another as he reads. His breath catches. The story unfolding before him, etched in the mud of Mesopotamia, is unmistakably familiar. A great flood, a righteous man chosen by the gods. An ark, animals saved, the destruction of a world and its rebirth. And then a perfect garden, a place of origin, a narrative that mirrors, with astonishing precision, the very words of the book of Genesis. But there's a crucial difference. These clay tablets, these fingerprints on the clay, were written not just hundreds but thousands of years before the earliest known versions of the Hebrew Bible. They are older, far, far older. It's a moment that shifts foundations. It suggests that the stories we thought were unique, divinely revealed to a single people, were in fact part of a much grander, much more ancient tapestry of human memory. The Bible, in this light, becomes not the original voice, but a powerful, resonant echo. The Sumerian tablets, those cool, rough pieces of ancient earth, are the source. They are the voice from the deep past, speaking of a time when the world was new, and gods walked the earth. We are not here tonight to diminish the sacred texts of any tradition. Instead, we are here to trace the sound back to its origin, to follow the river of memory upstream, past the familiar bends and turns, to the very spring from which it first emerged. We are going to listen to the original voice, the one that first spoke of a perfect beginning, of gods and men, of creation and loss. Let the weight of that realization settle over you. The stories we cherish are not inventions, but perhaps restorations, fragments of a universal narrative preserved in the most unlikely of mediums, the very earth itself. So, this paradise, this garden of perfect beginnings, what was it truly called? And what did that name actually mean? The Hebrew word for this idyllic place is E.DIN. It evokes images of delight, pleasure, and lushness, a garden of pure joy. But when we trace this word back, when we follow the linguistic currents upstream, just as we follow the narrative, we arrive at its Sumerian progenitor, E.DIN. And here, the first gentle twist in our understanding begins to unfold. For in Sumerian, E.DIN does not primarily mean pleasure or delight. Its most common translation is steppe, plain, or wilderness. It describes a flat, open, often arid landscape, a vast expanse of land outside the cultivated city walls. Not a shaded, enclosed orchard, but an open field. This might sound counterintuitive, even jarring. How could paradise be a plain? But the Sumerians were precise in their language, and their view of the divine was often more functional than poetic, at least in the earthly sense. In some contexts, E.DIN also carried the connotation of a base or headquarters. Consider this. Instead of a resort for humanity, the Sumerian E.DIN was a designated area, a specific zone. It was a place where the Igigi, the lower-ranking deities, were set to work. Think of it not as a natural, untamed garden, but as an enclosed, perhaps even structured, camp. A functional space designed by the higher gods, the Anunnaki, for a very specific purpose. Imagine a vast, flat expanse of land, perhaps initially dry and unyielding. But within this defined area there is order, there is purpose. It's a place where work was done, where resources were managed, where a particular kind of divine activity was concentrated. The walls of this E.DIN were not to keep humanity out of paradise, but perhaps to define the operational boundaries of the gods themselves. This shift in meaning from delightful garden to functional plain is subtle but profound. It hints at a different kind of origin story, one where humanity's first home was not a spontaneous gift of nature, but a deliberate construction, a part of a larger divine infrastructure. It suggests that the Garden of Eden as we understand it might be a later, romanticized interpretation of a far more practical, even industrial divine endeavor. Let that thought settle. The very first place, the cradle of civilization, the site of our divine origins, might have been less of a spontaneous paradise and more of a carefully managed enclosed base. A place where tasks were assigned, where labor began, and where the first chapters of human history were written, not in leisure, but in the structured activity of a divine enterprise. This E.DIN, this plane or base, was a place of work, of purpose, and of the earliest interactions between gods and the beings they would eventually create. The whispers of the desert wind carry this ancient truth, a quiet revelation about the true nature of our beginnings. The E.DIN, as the Sumerians conceived it, was not a wild, untamed paradise. Picture it instead as a meticulously engineered landscape. Imagine the sun beating down on broad, flat plains. The air shimmers with heat, and the horizon stretches, unbroken, save for the distant, hazy outlines of what would become the first cities. But here, in this designated zone, the land itself was not left to its own devices. It was a place of purpose, a functional space designed for a specific task. The earliest texts speak of the Igigi, a class of lower deities, not gods of grand cosmic power, but those tasked with the heavy lifting, the foundational work. These were the gods who toiled. Their labor was not in creating stars or shaping mountains, but in the very practical, very demanding work of shaping the earth itself. They dug canals, long straight lines carving through the fertile Crescent's rich, dark soil. Close your eyes and try to hear it. The rhythmic scrape of primitive tools against the earth. The grunt of effort, a low, steady hum beneath the vast, silent sky. Feel the dry earth crumbling under the weight of their picks. Then the satisfying thud as basket after basket of soil is hauled away. This wasn't a garden where lush vegetation sprang forth by divine command. This was a garden forged by sweat and deliberate design. The green you might imagine here wasn't the spontaneous explosion of a rainforest. It was the vibrant, almost shocking green of irrigated fields, carefully nurtured by the life, giving water channeled from the great rivers. The Tigris and Euphrates, those same rivers mentioned in Genesis, were the arteries of this ancient system. And the Igigi, the worker gods, were the engineers, the hydrologists, the laborers who ensured the flow. Imagine the sound of water, not just flowing freely, but being directed. The gentle lapping against the earthen banks of a newly dug canal. A soft gurgle as it fills the basin, slowly spreading across the thirsty land. Perhaps the creak and groan of a wooden sluice gate being opened, releasing a controlled torrent into a smaller ditch, bringing life to a parched patch of earth. These sounds would have been the soundtrack of E.DIN, a constant reminder of the effort and ingenuity that sustained it. It is an industrial beauty, isn't it? A beauty of order, of calculated efficiency. The straight lines of the canals, the precise geometry of the fields they nourished. This wasn't a place of wild abandon, but a controlled environment, a divine agricultural experiment on a grand scale. The very concept of paradise here is redefined, not by effortless abundance, but by the successful management of resources, by the mastery of the landscape for a specific divine need. The purpose was clear: to cultivate food, to grow provisions for the higher gods, the Anunnaki who resided in their own walled-off compounds within this E.DIN. It was a self-sustaining ecosystem designed to provide, and within this meticulously structured environment, the stage was set for the next crucial act, the creation of humanity itself. Now, let your mind drift from the structured fields and the sounds of flowing water, and consider the first human being to walk these engineered plains. In the Sumerian narratives, this figure is not Adam, but Adapa. And his story, while echoing familiar themes, casts a different light on humanity's earliest interactions with the divine. Adapa was not just any man. He was, according to the texts, the very first of the Apalu, the wise ones, the sages, created by Enki, the god of wisdom, water, and creation. Adapa was a perfect human prototype. He was endowed with immense intelligence, given knowledge, and made, in many ways, an ideal representative of his species. He was the model, the exemplar, the first of his kind to truly embody consciousness and skill. Picture Enki, the craftsman god, observing Adapa, not a distant, abstract creator, but a god deeply involved in his creation, perhaps even a little proud. Adapa served Enki as a priest, tending to the sacred rites, a direct conduit between the human and the divine. He was, in essence, the first bridge, the first interpreter of the cosmic order for those who would follow. One day, while fishing, a mundane, human activity that grounds him in the physical world, Adapa's boat is capsized by the south wind. In a fit of very human anger, Adapa curses the wind, breaking its wing. This act of defiance, this assertion of human will against a force of nature, brings him to the attention of Anu, the highest of the gods, the celestial sovereign who presides over all. Imagine the journey. Adapa, a mortal, albeit an extraordinary one, is summoned to the heavens, to the abode of Anu. This is not a garden anymore, but a glittering, awe-inspiring palace among the stars. The air would be thin, perhaps, the light different. A sense of immense scale of cosmic power would press down on him. Enki, Adapa's creator and protector, prepares him for this encounter. He gives Adapa specific instructions, a set of divine counsel, much like a loving father preparing his child for a difficult journey or a crucial meeting. Enki warns Adapa not to eat the food of death or drink the water of death that Anu will offer him. He tells Adapa to instead accept the garment of mourning and the oil of anointing, to show humility and respect. Adapa ascends to Anu's presence. The atmosphere would be charged with immense power. He is questioned, his transgression against the south wind acknowledged. But then, a moment of profound significance. Anu, perhaps impressed by Adapa's wisdom, his creation by Enki, or simply by the sheer novelty of this intelligent mortal, offers him something extraordinary. Anu offers Adapa the food of life and the water of life. This is where the parallel and the crucial divergence with the Adam story becomes stark. Adam in Genesis is denied the fruit of the tree of life after his transgression. Adapa, however, is offered it, but Adapa, following Enki's instructions, refuses. He politely declines the divine sustenance, believing it to be the food of death and water of death that Enki had warned him about. He chooses, instead, to accept the garment and the oil, fulfilling his creator's advice. And so humanity, in the form of Adapa, misses its chance at immortality, not through an act of willful disobedience against a direct divine command, but through a misunderstanding, a tragic misinterpretation, a communication breakdown between gods. Enki, in his desire to protect Adapa from a perceived threat, inadvertently seals humanity's fate. Anu, perhaps with a sigh, a sense of resignation, simply smiles. He acknowledges the wisdom of Enki, even if it led to this outcome. He sends Adapa back to Earth, a mortal man, but still wise, still a leader, still the prototype. This narrative offers a different kind of fall. Not a fall from grace due to sin, but a fall from potential due to a divine miscommunication, a protective instinct gone awry. It's less about punishment and more about a missed opportunity, a path not taken, and in that missed opportunity the seeds of mortality of the finite nature of human life are sown. It is a quieter tragedy, perhaps, but no less profound. A gentle fading of a possibility rather than a thunderous expulsion. Now, let's turn our attention to one of the most curious and often debated passages in the Genesis account, the creation of Eve from Adam's rib. It is a detail that has puzzled theologians and delighted poets for millennia, a singular image of intimate, almost surgical creation. But what if this seemingly unique detail, too, has a deeper, older root in the Sumerian narratives? Close your eyes and let the sounds of ancient languages drift through your mind, like the soft rustle of reeds in a marsh. Imagine the careful hand of a scribe pressing a reed stylus into wet clay, forming cuneiform signs. Each one a tiny wedge, a whisper of meaning. In Sumerian mythology, there is a goddess named Ninti. Her name, when broken down, offers a fascinating linguistic insight. The Sumerian word ti has a remarkable double meaning. It can mean rib, and it can also mean to make live or life. So, the goddess Ninti is, quite literally, the lady of the rib. But she is also, just as accurately, the lady of life. This isn't a coincidence. This is a profound linguistic pun, a clever play on words embedded deep within the very fabric of the Sumerian language. And it is this linguistic elegance that perhaps traveled across time and cultures, through oral traditions and early written texts, eventually finding its way into the Hebrew narrative of Genesis. Consider the story of Enki, the same god who created Adapa. In one Sumerian myth, Enki falls ill. Specifically, he suffers from a pain in his rib. To heal him, the great mother goddess Ninhursag gives birth to 8 healing deities, each one created to cure a specific part of Enki's ailing body. And for Enki's rib, the goddess created is Ninti, the lady of the rib, the one who brings life to the rib and thus life itself. Now imagine the early biblical authors, or perhaps the oral storytellers who preceded them, encountering these ancient Sumerian narratives. They might have heard the story of Ninti, the goddess associated with healing a rib, and whose name also meant Lady of Life. The Hebrew word for rib is toxala. It is a common word, but the idea of a woman being created from a man's toxala is in the context of other creation myths, quite specific and unusual. What if, rather than a literal anatomical event, it was a translation, or rather, a reinterpretation, of this Sumerian linguistic phenomenon? The power of language, the subtle shifts in meaning, the way a single word can carry multiple layers of interpretation across different cultures. It is like a whisper passing from one ear to another, slowly transforming yet retaining a kernel of its original sound. The biblical author, perhaps not fully grasping the Sumerian double entendre, or perhaps deliberately choosing to interpret it in a more literal narrative fashion, took the Lady of the Rib and transformed her into the woman created from the rib. The clever linguistic pun. Tai, meaning both rib and life, becomes a concrete, physical act of creation. This subtle linguistic bridge, this ancient play on words, transforms into a foundational myth for billions of people. The Lady of Life becomes the mother of all living, a role perfectly suited for Eve. The connection between the rib and life is preserved, but the method of that connection is reinterpreted. It is a beautiful example of how myths evolve, how stories adapt, how the very sounds and meanings of words can shape the deepest narratives of human existence. It is a gentle unraveling of a mystery, revealing not a flaw in the biblical story, but a fascinating glimpse into its ancient multicultural tapestry. The truth in this case is not less profound, but more intricate, more interwoven with the deep currents of human language and shared narrative. Let that thought settle in your mind, the subtle echo of a Sumerian word, resonating across millennia, shaping our understanding of where we came from and how we came to be. It's a quiet testament to the enduring power of language, to its ability to carry secrets, to transform meaning, and to whisper ancient truths into new ears. The cool clay, worn smooth by the passage of millennia, whispers secrets not of fire and brimstone, but of flowing water and deep wisdom. You trace the intricate glyphs, the wedge-shaped impressions left by a reed stylus, symbols that predate the familiar narratives by thousands of years. And as your mind drifts across these ancient marks, a different image begins to coalesce around the familiar figure of the serpent. Forget the hiss of temptation, the glistening apple, the dramatic fall from grace. Tonight, let's consider the serpent not as a tempter, but as a teacher, not as a symbol of insidious evil, but of profound, perhaps even dangerous awakening. In the ancient Sumerian tablets, in the very oldest stories humanity committed to permanent record, the figure often associated with this pivotal moment of knowledge giving is Enki, Lord of the Abzu, the freshwater ocean beneath the earth, God of wisdom, magic, and creation. He is not a devil, lurking in shadows to ensnare the innocent with cunning words or malicious intent. He is a prime mover, a profound intelligence, often depicted as a benevolent force, deeply invested in the well-being and progress of humanity. His realm is not one of darkness and deceit, but of the deep, life-giving waters, the source of all knowledge, the very wellspring of ingenuity and innovation. He is the one who, in many of these ancient texts, actually creates humanity, or at least refines our earliest forms, breathing the spark of life into us. His symbols are potent, resonating through history, long after Sumerian cities lay buried beneath the desert sands. The flowing waters, of course, symbolizing life and wisdom, the very currents of consciousness and the flow of ideas. The fish representing fertility and abundance, and most strikingly, the entwined serpents. Not the single, slithering snake of biblical lore, a solitary figure of temptation, but often a pair spiraling upwards, mirroring the double helix of our very being, the intricate blueprint of life itself. Think of the caduceus, the staff carried by Hermes in Greek myth, the swift messenger of the gods, the psychopomp guiding souls, or the staff of Asclepius, the ancient Greek god of healing, whose symbol is still used by medical associations worldwide, representing renewal and restoration. These symbols, born from the deepest antiquity, represent medicine, knowledge, transformation, and the constant renewal of life. They are not emblems of corruption or death, but of profound healing and enlightened understanding. They speak of a wisdom that penetrates to the very core of existence, unraveling its mysteries. Imagine the Sumerian scribes, their reed styluses pressing into the wet clay with meticulous care and reverence. They weren't inscribing a tale of cosmic rebellion or moral downfall. They were recording the intricate dance between powerful gods and nascent humanity, a story of creation and evolution, of guidance and growth. Enki, in these narratives, is often the one arguing for humanity, protecting us from the harsher, more punitive decrees of other, more distant deities like the often impatient and sometimes wrathful Enlil. His motive for imparting knowledge, for giving us the spark of awareness, wasn't to harm us, to condemn us to suffering or eternal damnation. It was to elevate us, to grant us the portion of what the gods themselves possessed, the capacity for understanding, for self-reflection, for creation, for independent thought, for the ability to master our own environment. He desired his children, his experiments, to thrive, to evolve, to perhaps even become like the gods themselves in their intellectual capacity, if not their immortality. Picture a quiet, subterranean laboratory, perhaps beneath the flowing waters of the Abzu, rather than a lush, sun-drenched garden. The gentle lapping of cool, fresh water against unseen walls, the faint hum of ancient, unknown technologies or subtle genetic manipulations, rather than the rustle of leaves or the chirping of birds. Enki, the master geneticist, the divine engineer, observing his creations with a discerning eye, seeing their potential. He sees their limitations, their raw, unrefined state, their unthinking obedience, their lack of true agency. And perhaps, with a touch of divine audacity, a spark of revolutionary intent, he decides to accelerate their development, to offer them a shortcut to wisdom, a catalyst for consciousness, a genetic upgrade, a quickening of the mind. The serpent then becomes the conduit for this accelerated evolution, a potent symbol of the very life force and wisdom that coils within us all, waiting to be uncoiled, activated, brought to light. It is a story of empowerment, of a deliberate act of divine giving, not punishment, a whisper of boundless potential, not a curse. The cool clay holds this truth, patiently waiting for us to listen, to reread the ancient script with new eyes, to feel the weight of this deeper understanding settle gently over us. This isn't a tale of a fall, but of a deliberate, of challenging ascent. The quiet, flowing presence of Enki, the serpent of wisdom, subtly shaping the very first stirrings of human consciousness, guiding us towards a complex, self-aware existence. Close your eyes and feel the ancient wisdom flowing, like cool water through your own understanding, illuminating pathways you may have forgotten. And so, if the serpent was a benefactor, a conduit for profound knowledge, what then of the forbidden fruit, the elusive tree of the knowledge of good and evil? The very name, in its biblical context, conjures immediate images of moral transgression, of a clear line drawn between right and wrong, between obedience and sin, between purity and corruption. But in the older echoes, in the faint impressions left on the cool, silent clay tablets, the meaning shifts, becomes more nuanced, more profound, a tale less about a simple moral failing and more about a fundamental, irreversible transformation of being. Imagine the world before, a seamless, undifferentiated experience. The boundary between self and environment was blurred, almost non-existent. Humanity was immersed, intertwined with nature. Animals spoke, perhaps not in human tongues, or with complex vocabulary, but in a language of instinct and shared understanding, a primal telepathy that connected all living things. There was no need for clothes, for there was no concept of nakedness, no shame, no self-consciousness, no sense of being separate from the natural world, no judgment. The world simply was, and humanity was simply in it, a part of its unthinking flow, its gentle rhythms, a state of innocent, unthinking bliss, a perfect primal harmony, like a dream from which one never fully awakens, a state of unburdened grace. Then comes the fruit, or rather, the activation, the spark, the profound, irreversible shift. In the Sumerian view, this wasn't about moral judgment, about choosing between good and evil as we understand them today. A simple binary choice. It was about the dawning of consciousness itself. It was the moment humanity gained awareness, a profound, often unsettling realization of self, of individuality, of distinction, of separation from the collective consciousness of creation. It was like waking from a long, beautiful dream, only to find the stark, sometimes harsh, realities of the waking world laid bare before you, demanding your attention, your choice. The world itself didn't change, but our perception of it did, irrevocably, fundamentally. Picture this transformation unfolding within you slowly, gently, yet with immense power. One moment, you are part of the landscape, an extension of the sun, the soil, the flowing rivers, flowing effortlessly with them. The next, a subtle veil is lifted, a new lens placed over your eyes. You suddenly see yourself as distinct, separate, an eye observing of them, an individual in a vast, complex world. The animals no longer meet your gaze with the same knowing understanding. Their sounds become mere noises. Their movements just instinct, no longer speaking directly to your soul or sharing a common language. You feel the cool air on your skin, and for the first time a blush rises, a flicker of vulnerability, a strange new sensation of exposure, of being seen, of having something to hide. This isn't about sin. It is about the birth of the ego, the genesis of self-awareness, the first stirrings of introspection, of the inner world. The knowledge of good and evil wasn't a lesson in a simplistic morality, but the ability to discern, to differentiate, to categorize, to analyze, to understand cause and effect, to weigh options, to make choices, to plan for the future, to learn from the past. It was the capacity for abstract thought, for planning, for innovation, for developing complex language and intricate social structures. It was the moment humanity ceased to be merely an animal in a garden and began to become a conscious agent, a creator in its own right, capable of shaping its environment and its destiny. This awakening brought with it incredible power, the power to build, to innovate, to dream, to create art and science. But it also brought a profound sense of loss, the loss of that effortless, unthinking bliss, that primal unity, the end of a perfect, albeit unconscious, existence. The tablets describe humanity suddenly seeing the world with new eyes, understanding the intricate dance of life and death, of light and shadow, not as a judgment, but as a fundamental, unavoidable aspect of reality. It was the moment we stepped out of the eternal present and into the relentless currents of time, aware of past and future, of our own fleeting mortality, and the vastness of the cosmos. This was the true gift of the fruit, sumai, the gift of being of conscious existence. The quiet hum of innocence replaced by the murmur of self-awareness, a complex symphony of thought and feeling, of joy and sorrow, of connection and profound solitude. It was the beginning of our human journey, a path of infinite possibility, but also of immense responsibility and the weight of choice. The cool clay remembers the moment the world fractured, not into good and evil in a moral sense, but into us and everything else, marking the beginning of our human story, our journey into self-discovery. Let that realization settle softly over you, like dust over ancient ruins, quiet and profound as you drift deeper. As the dawn of awareness broke over humanity, a new tension began to stir in the ethereal realms, an echo of the divine displeasure that would later be woven into the fabric of sacred texts across countless cultures. In the familiar narratives, it is often God's anger that leads to the expulsion from Eden, a direct consequence of human transgression, of a broken commandment, of an act of disobedience. But in the older, deeper whispers from the cool, silent clay, the reasons are less about morality and more about power, about cosmic balance, about the very nature of creation itself and its unintended, often unpredictable, consequences. Imagine the Sumerian pantheon, a complex hierarchy of powerful, often capricious, beings each with their own domains and prerogatives. Enlil, the chief god of air, wind, and storms, often stood as the stern, uncompromising force, the upholder of cosmic order, sometimes to the point of harshness, demanding absolute adherence to divine will. His concern, as revealed in the tablets, wasn't primarily about humanity's sin in our modern understanding, not about a specific act of defiance or a moral failing that warranted punishment. It was about something far more visceral, far more primal, noise. The growing clamor of humanity, their relentless reproduction, their burgeoning cities, their sheer, undeniable vitality, and their ever-increasing numbers. Picture the vast plains, once quiet, punctuated only by the sounds of wind and wildlife, a serene, almost sacred silence, a world perfectly ordered for the gods. Now imagine the distant murmur of human voices growing louder, multiplying, spreading across the landscape. The faint sounds of early settlements, the rhythmic thud of tools shaping earth and stone, the cries of children echoing across the fields, the ceaseless activity of a species coming into its own. For the gods, accustomed to the serene, ordered quiet of their own domains, to the slow, deliberate pace of divine existence, This burgeoning human activity was more than a disturbance. It was a cacophony, a disruption to their peace, a challenge to their established order, a constant, irritating hum. It wasn't a moral failing that provoked Enlil. It was a perceived threat to the tranquil dominion of the divine, a feeling of being overwhelmed, of losing control over his own creation. He saw humanity, his own creation, growing too numerous, too loud, perhaps even too ambitious, too independent, too much like the gods themselves. This underlying fear, this deep-seated anxiety of the creators towards their creation, is subtly, yet chillingly, articulated in a line from Genesis that, when viewed through the Sumerian lens, takes on a profound new meaning. Lest he put forth his hand, and take also of the tree of life, and eat, and live forever. This isn't solely about punishment for disobedience, about a divine tantrum in response to a broken rule. It is about a deeper, more ancient anxiety, the fear that humanity, having gained the spark of awareness, the capacity for discernment, for self-direction, might then reach for the ultimate prize, immortality, for eternal life, for truly God-like status, to become truly equal to the gods, rendering them not just disturbed, but perhaps, in time, obsolete, unnecessary, their role diminished. So the expulsion from E.DIN, from that enclosed, functional abode of the righteous, that carefully controlled divine camp, wasn't merely a curse, a punitive act to inflict suffering. It was a calculated, strategic move, a separation, a way to contain a growing power to manage a burgeoning population, to ensure the established hierarchy remained intact, to maintain the cosmic order. It was the god's self-preservation instinct at play, a cosmic act of risk management, a decision made out of necessity. They had created humanity to toil, to serve, to free them from their own labors. But now this creation was evolving, exceeding its initial parameters, threatening to usurp its creators, to become a rival, a force of its own. The wind carries Enlil's decree, not in thunderous shouts of rage or a dramatic display of divine fury, but in a quiet, firm decision, a cosmic sigh that ripples through the fabric of existence, altering the course of human destiny. The walls of E.DIN, once a sanctuary, a place of divine order and human service, now become a barrier, a boundary between the gods' perfect silent world and the chaotic, vibrant, ever-expanding realm of humanity. It's a story not of divine vengeance, but of divine precaution, of a necessary, if painful, severing, a cutting of the umbilical cord. The cool clay holds the memory of this separation, not as a tragedy, but as a necessary, pivotal step in the unfolding saga of existence. The quiet hum of divine fear, a subtle tremor in the ancient earth, marking the moment humanity was set free, not from sin, but from direct divine oversight, to forge its own path in the vast, open world beyond the walls into an uncertain but self-directed future. Let the echoes of that ancient decision drift softly into your dreams, a quiet understanding of our long journey. The gates, once open, now slowly, irrevocably, began to close, not with a clang of metal or a rumble of stone, but with a silent, profound understanding. The lush, irrigated fields of E.DIN, the vibrant green that had been cultivated by divine hands, began to recede into memory. The sounds of the Igigi's tools, the low hum of the gods' conversations, the steady flow of the engineered rivers, verse, all these faded, replaced by the vast open silence of the plains beyond. Imagine that first step, the cool, damp earth of the enclosed garden, giving way to the dry, shifting sands of the wilderness. The sun, once filtered by the canopy of divine protection, now beat down with an unfiltered intensity. The wind, no longer merely a gentle breeze through cultivated orchards, carried the grit of the desert, the taste of ancient dust and untamed space. This wasn't a punishment in the conventional sense, not a vengeful expulsion, but a necessary severing, a weaning. Humanity, having tasted awareness, having gained the spark of divine knowledge, could no longer remain a child in the nursery of the gods. This was the true east of Eden, not just a geographical shift, but an existential migration, a journey from a state of effortless provision to one of self-reliance, of ingenuity born from necessity. The first humans, guided by an instinct deeper than memory, began to learn. They felt the hunger pangs, not as a fleeting discomfort, but as a persistent call to action. They saw the barren earth, not as an insurmountable obstacle, but as a canvas for their own will. Picture them scattered across the plains. Their hands, once idle or engaged only in the simple tasks of paradise, now began to grasp tools. Not the sophisticated implements of the Igigi, but crude stones, sharpened sticks. The first furrows cut into the unyielding soil. The first seeds, carefully hoarded from the remnants of the garden, pressed into the ground with a silent prayer to a sky that no longer offered direct answers. The sound of digging, the rhythmic scrape of early hoes, became the new symphony of human existence. The rivers, those same 4 rivers mentioned in Genesis time, the Tigris and Euphrates, still flowing high-D, now became a challenge, a resource to be mastered, not merely enjoyed. The lessons learned from watching the Igigi irrigate their plots, the memory of how water was coaxed and channeled began to surface. The first human-made canals, clumsy and inefficient at first, but driven by an undeniable will to survive, began to snake across the landscape. The gurgle of water, diverted by human hands, was a sound of triumph, a whisper of a new beginning. And with this new beginning came the first settlements. Not the grand, geometrically perfect cities of the gods, but clusters of rudimentary shelters. Mud bricks, sun-baked and rough, piled one upon another. The smell of wood smoke, the first wisp of human civilization, rising into the vast desert sky as families gathered around a fire, sharing the meager fruits of their labor. This was the birth of community, of shared purpose, of the unspoken understanding that survival depended on cooperation. The silence of the plains was slowly broken by new sounds. The chatter of children, the murmur of adults planning, the rhythmic pounding of grain, the lowing of newly domesticated animals. These were the sounds of human freedom, of self-determination, the weight of choice. Once a burden, slowly transformed into the exhilaration of creation. They were no longer merely existing, they were building. They were forging their own destiny. One mud brick, one harvested grain, one flickering campfire at a time. The memory of E.DIN lingered, a faint echo, but the urgent, vibrant reality of their new world demanded their full attention. The journey had begun, a vast, arduous trek into the unknown, carrying only the seeds of knowledge and the nascent power of their own will. And from that journey, from those struggles, would rise the very cities whose libraries would one day preserve the memory of the garden they had left behind. That journey, that initial step east of Eden, wasn't just a physical displacement. It was the birth of a profound and enduring human emotion, nostalgia, a yearning for a place, a state of being that we can't quite articulate, but feel deep in our bones. Why do we millennia later still tell stories of lost paradises? Why do we dream of golden ages, of effortless existence, of a time before struggle and sorrow? This isn't merely a cultural artifact. It is a whisper from our collective unconscious. A memory, perhaps, of a time before individual consciousness became a burden. Think of it as a cellular memory of the womb, that perfect enclosed environment where every need was met, every sensation filtered, every threat external. A state of primal security, of absolute provision, where decisions were unnecessary and responsibility was unknown. E.DIN, in this sense, becomes less a physical garden and more a metaphor for that state of blissful, ignorant dependence. We yearn for the simplicity of not knowing, the burden of awareness, the knowledge of good and evil, is heavy. It forces us to choose, to discern, to bear the weight of consequences. Before the fruit there was innocence. After there was the endless labyrinth of morality, of regret, of the relentless march of time. We remember a time when animals spoke, when the world was a seamless tapestry of being, before the sharp divisions of human perception began to categorize and separate. We mourn the loss of that holistic connection, that pure, unadulterated belonging. This nostalgia manifests in countless ways. Every utopian vision, every dream of a perfect future, every longing for a simpler past, carries within it the ghost of E.DIN. It is the sigh we exhale after a long day, wishing for a moment of absolute peace where nothing is asked of us. It is the comfort we seek in familiar routines, in the gentle embrace of sleep, a temporary return to a state of unknowing. We build fences around our homes, not just for security, but to recreate a miniature, personal enclosure, a sanctuary from the wildness outside. But the paradox of this longing is that we cannot truly go back. The gates are closed, not by an angry God, but by the very act of our own evolution. To return to E.DIN would mean shedding the very things that make us human, our capacity for choice, for creation, for love that has been tested by loss, for wisdom born from struggle. It would mean erasing the masterpieces of art, the towering structures of our cities, the intricate complexities of our philosophies, all forged in the crucible of our independence. The knowledge once taken cannot be untaken. The awareness, once awakened, cannot be put back to sleep. We are forever changed, forever exiled from that primal garden, and perhaps in that exile, in that constant yearning, lies the true engine of human progress, of our endless striving, our ceaseless quest for meaning in a world we must now cultivate ourselves. The longing for E.DIN is not a weakness. It is the echo of our origin, a beautiful melancholic reminder of what we once were, and what we have chosen to become. It is the bittersweet song of humanity, sung across millennia, a quiet melody of what was lost and what was gained. So where is E.DIN now? Is it truly lost to the sands of time buried beneath the dust of Iraq, an archaeological curiosity? Or is it something far more intimate, far closer than any map can guide you to? Tonight, as the world outside begins to quiet, and your own breathing settles into a soft, steady rhythm, let go of the search. You don't need a shovel or an ancient tablet or even a detailed map of Mesopotamia. The true E.DIN, the real garden of peace and rest, is not a place you can travel to, but a state you can cultivate. It resides within the quiet depths of your own being. Close your eyes gently. Feel the weight of your body sinking deeper into the surface beneath you. Let the tension drain from your muscles, from your jaw, from the space between your eyebrows. Release the thoughts that still cling to the edges of your mind, like leaves caught on a gentle current. Watch them drift away, without judgment, without attachment. Imagine now not a physical garden, but an inner sanctuary. A space within you that is always calm, always secure, always filled with a profound and unconditional peace. This is your personal E.DIN, built not with mud bricks or divine intervention, but with the conscious intention of your own mind. You are the architect, the gardener, the guardian of this sacred space. Feel the quietude settle around you like a soft, warm blanket. Hear the gentle hum of your own existence, the subtle symphony of your life force. The rivers of your consciousness, once perhaps turbulent, now flow smoothly, calmly, carrying you towards a deeper stillness. You are safe here. You are whole here. You are at rest here. You have journeyed far tonight through ancient lands and forgotten stories. You have walked with gods and with the first humans. Now the journey is complete. There is nowhere else to go, nothing else to do. Simply be. Be here, in this moment, in this inner garden of your own making. The rivers still flow at the very edge of your dreams. Let them carry you now. Drift back to E.DIN, to the original stillness, to the profound peace that awaits you within. Good night, my friends.